Everybody to the Heart Coherence Collaborative. We are really excited and honored to have our friend Paul Selig back with us again today. So thank you. We're going to be asking him a lot of questions about everything going on in the world and some specific stuff about your new work.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
We'd love to just check in. What's new in your life? What's going on? What's the latest and greatest?
I've been trying to write a memoir about my life and my evolution as a channeler, which was really unexpected. So that's been what I've been focusing on more so than, I'm doing my channeled work as I always do, but I have not really had the opportunity to reflect on it and the whole passage that it's been. I talk about it sometimes in interviews like this, but I really haven't gotten into, the nitty gritty. So I'm revisiting a lot of stuff that's not always comfortable, and I'm realizing new stuff, which is interesting and uncomfortable. And I'm grateful to be in the process of it. So that's what's new.
So cool. I can't wait to check that out.
Yeah, that's going to be, we know some of your story from talking to you. As you are going through everything, is there a thing that's come up that you haven't thought about for a long time and almost was like kind of surprising to you?
There's a lot of stuff, and there's stuff that I thought I understood in my narrative that I'm getting to receive from, the vantage point of being older. And I think having been witness to a lot of other people in their process, as they grow, when I look back at my early 30s, which was really a challenging and formative time for me, when I was in some ways on a very devotional path. Although I didn't even know what such a thing was. I didn't even know that I was on a path. I was just in it. I look back at the choices that I made and how inclined I was to give my authority over to other people, and how really receptive I was back then. And when I look back at that time, I really suspect that some of the abilities that I seem to have now were the fruits of that time of real devotion. I didn't set out to be a channeler or a psychic. They were byproducts, I think, of the other work. Which was far more about, my own growth spiritually and my own sense of connectiveness. And I always have to say, I don't feel that I've arrived. I'm not one of those people that shows up and says, well, this is how you do it, because I really don't know. I show up for what I have in front of me and do the best I can. But when I look at that time, I'm understanding the pieces of the puzzle in a way that I don't know that I ever really did. And that's been useful and at times a little disturbing and at times tremendously wonderful. But that's it for this moment. If you ask me this next week, I probably have a different answer. I'd be focusing on a different part of my life.
I'm curious, based off of what you said about that, 30-year-old time for struggling, what advice would you have now? Because, I'm going through it. It's been a wild year. It's been a wild few years. So,
the only thing that because I don't know where you're at, I could tune into you and see what I got if I were to do that. Which
feel free.
Because sometimes where we think we are isn't necessarily where we are. It's just where we need to be.
Yeah.
When I look back at it, I suspect the biggest characterization of the whole journey for me now has been the understanding of grace, whatever that is, in a way that I would have had no idea was even present while the crap was hitting the fan, because it really was. And where there were enormous reroutings and endings of relationships and beginnings of other chapters of a life, when I begin to look at some of that as part of a larger experience and not focus on the drama of the individual trouble or pain or end of a relationship, I see how the pieces kind of work together in some kind of beautiful way that really is all forward motion, even when it doesn't seem like it. And, I suspect in some ways, derailed from a life that I thought that I was expected to have. And I really did that. I went from, getting a master's from Yale and being in magazines and as a writer and, having what looked like it was going to be this really sort of posh or stellar artsy experience to being flat broke, totally confused, suddenly believing that maybe there was this thing like a God, which I'd been taught to laugh at when I was younger. And, and it was a crazy time for me. My 30s were, in the midst of the AIDS epidemic, and everybody I knew and went to school with and my teachers and people, everybody was dying all over the place, and it was a mind-boggling time to be young. And this was going on, simultaneously with early recovery. So when I look at grace, I see that it all makes sense, not intellectually and certainly not in the way my old colleagues would have thought it should, or my family or anybody else. It was this other thing that was happening. So when I look back to the idea of allowance and permission and letting things happen, it gets much easier. The choices that I made when I was your age were the best choices I could have made at the time, given what I knew. I can't fault myself for them. And maybe I can say that now because I'm not going to say that I'm content and perfectly happy all the time, but I've come to a different place of acceptance, which is peaceful, than I had known and didn't really know that I would ever have. And again, I don't think that I've arrived. Maybe I'm just having a nice pause or a nice respite from, other drama. That's possible, So I don't know what I would say. I'll tune into you if you want me to and tell you where I think you're at.
Go for it.
Do you mind saying your whole name for me? Because that's how I do it.
Kyle James Boyd.
You're like, what the fuck is this? What the fuck? It's what the. But there's a part of you, and I don't know what your circumstances are, but that does seem to know that everything is going to be okay. You still show up like you're looking upward and over. Like if there's a wall in front of you, you acknowledge the wall, but you're actually able to step on your toes and peek above it and see that there is more there. And what you're seeing as possible isn't necessarily what you can touch and taste yet. But you kind of seem to know it, like you're leaning into a future that I think is hopeful. And whenever anybody's eyes go up in a reading, your eyes don't go straight up, which is probably good. When people's eyes they go straight up in a reading, that sometimes means they don't want to be here, they want to be off in the ethers, But you look up, which is always to spirit, and you look up towards possibility and potential. And if I'm reading this right, your feet are still on the ground for this, which is a nice thing. So you're not, zipping off into stuff. When I was young and I had enough evidence that there was something more, and it was a palpable evidence. I was able to feel energy at that time. And if you can start to feel energy or see it, people are different, that automatically changes the whole way that reality must be structured, because you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to feel, all these things. And many people do. And when we start talking to each other about it, then we have a context. You don't feel so strange. But, for me at that time, I was so invested in whatever that other thing was that I didn't care that much about the practical. It faded away. I was like, if there is like a God or something like a God, then everything else, what does everything else mean suddenly? It was a game changer for me. But I had come from a childhood and a life where there could be no such thing. We didn't believe in those things. And suddenly I was starting to. So it was a paradigm shift. And what I notice now about people a bit more is that because these things aren't quite so far out, people are having their own experiences with lots of different things, whether it be energy work or plant medicine or wherever people are journeying to or discovering that these other ideas aren't so out of the box anymore. So they don't have to turn everything upside down. They can be entered into perhaps a little more comfortably, And I think that's a good thing. So anyway, I don't know what I'm talking about at this point. So you can ask another question if you have one, but.
I'd love to hear you talk about, because it's something that I'm thinking about lately, that there seems to be some sort of discord between, everybody's so obsessed with like manifestation and, creating what you want. And it's a little bit at odds with the recovery perspective, with the more 12-step perspective. In some ways, that's more, let me be in God's will and kind of a servant.
Well, I suspect that's true. And I think at this point, what people don't get is that we're always manifesting. I don't care if you're in a recovery room or in a corporate boardroom. We're always in vibrational accord with our reality. And that's individually and collectively. I just think people figured out that you could actually focus intention towards manifestation. And the problem with that is everybody runs around trying to get what they think that they should have. And the real challenge with that is everybody's culling from a list of what they think they're supposed to have. So I'm supposed to be famous or beautiful or have lots of money or date this person or that, I don't know that it works that way. See, the problem with that is, and there's nothing wrong with, my guides used to say, there's nothing wrong with a house on the hill. Somebody gets to live there. But why do you want it? And that's the question. And if you want it so that you can be the envy of your neighbors or prove to your parents that you're not a failure or, whatever, you're still creating with a bias or basis of fear. And then you're putting that into the world. And if your self-worth is contingent on what you get, or, the thing is, we're always manifesting. I do live in a house on the hill. I think it's really ironic that I do, but I know why I'm here, and it's the last place I would have put myself. So if you look at it this way, we're always creating, you are in vibrational accord with everything you see. And I'm going to say this individually and collectively. People don't want to hear about the collective stuff because suddenly then we become responsible to how our consciousness is informing what we see. So if my focus is I need the better job and I need the career that looks this way or that, and we forget that we're living in a community where people are starving, we're operating a kind of selfish bias. Now, I was thinking about this the other day. I don't even know how I should tell this story, but when I was, I'll try. I'll give it a shot. Maybe I'll edit it. But I think I was in, I don't know, it was many years ago when The Secret came out, and I watched it. And there was one day when I was feeling just super keyed in and powerful, and I had just gotten a website, and I realized. I didn't have my picture on it because I didn't want anybody to find me for the psychic stuff. You had to know somebody that knew me to get an appointment. But somebody said, you need to get your picture up there. Okay, so I said, where am I going to get my picture taken? And I went out and took my dog out for a walk. And again, I was like keyed up. And some guy stops me right in front of my apartment building with a camera and says, hi, I'm taking a picture of New Yorkers and their dogs. Can I take your picture? I went, oh. And I said no, because it was New York. And then I went, maybe I'll meet somebody really great on the street. And somebody tried to pick me up on the street 2 blocks later. I went, this has never happened to me in my life. I was so shaken up, but I was excited. And then I thought, what would it feel like to be a well-known psychic? What would that be like? And I just keyed into that. And I'm continuing to walk down the street, and this very pretty woman, she was blonde she was wearing daffodil yellow dress and a white blouse. She looked about as prim and proper as you could be on the street in the West Village in New York. And she saw me walk by and her jaw dropped and her eyes popped out of her head. And she started making these sort of magical symbols in the air. And then she screamed, "F you," at the top of her lungs. And I was so shaken up. I took the dog and I ran back home. And I went, well, that's what it's like, you know? And I had the experience of, you know, be careful what you ask for, you know, really. But I don't know what I want to say about this. I think the problem with the manifestation stuff is much of what we're calling is what we think we're supposed to have. And it's the personality self that's demanding these things. Mm-hmm. And, you know, my personality self has preferences and there's nothing wrong with it. But when I let go of the results a bit, other things begin to happen that could surpass what I would have imagined. There's nothing wrong with manifestation. I struggled with the 12-step stuff early on, and I, you know, have, you know, been substance free for 37 years now almost. But early on, I understood this idea of turning one's will and one's life over to the care of God as a kind of passivity. And I just sat there on my hands for a few years thinking, well, I guess I don't have to do anything. It's all going to show up. But, you know, my guides have said it in many different ways. But, you know, if you live in a cold climate and you have a fireplace and you're preparing for winter, go chop the firewood and bring it indoors. We do what is ours to do. If I didn't show up for the work that I have been given to do, which I didn't go looking for, it happened, it really found me, but my job was to show up in a regular way and commit to it. And I think it's the same thing. We have to foster our friendships. We have to, you know, take care of our bodies and our home. There are things that are our responsibilities to do. If we don't do that, they don't happen. So I don't think it's about being passive. I do think it is about being receptive, which is different. And that's about allowance. My guides say that when we know something, and that's just clear cognizance, true knowing, when we're given our knowing, we need to act on it, whatever that is. And I look at the times when I did know something and I didn't act on it, and I paid a price, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing. So how would somebody new be able to figure out what the knowing is versus just their brain saying, "Oh, you should date that pretty girl," or, you know, like how do you figure that out?
It's really simple. When you're in your knowing, there is never a question attached. If you look at the times in your life when you really knew something, like I knew I was in love, I knew I was going to lose the job, I knew this was going to be big trouble, I knew to stay away from this one or that one. When you have those moments of knowing, there's never really a question attached. When I'm thinking, I'm debating. Now, I knew when I saw the house that I now live in, I'd never owned a house, and I wasn't planning on really moving to Maui when I did, but I did. I knew. And then I had my moment of knowing. I had this big flush of energy through me. I knew there was no fear in that moment. And then I went back up into my head and I made every kind of list of pros and cons that everybody else would make. And I called a dozen friends and 10 psychics that I knew and said, what do I do? What do I do? You know? And I didn't want to listen to it, but I did, fortunately. And it was very much the right thing for me to do. So when you're truly knowing anything, I don't think that there's any fear attached in that moment, because I think knowing doesn't hold the energy of fear. We can get frightened of what we understand and what it might require of us. And I also think there are no questions. When I'm thinking it out, I'm always in a debate. And there's nothing wrong with thinking. We do it all the time. I don't know how to make a cake. I got to look up a recipe, you know? That's thinking. Eventually I know, and there's no need for that.
So it makes me think that fear can obviously be very tricky, where it might lead you to think you know something, or maybe even be afraid of something that could be good for you. So I wonder, the guides talk so much about fear.
Well, I can always try to speak from my personal experience. If I'm rationalizing something, I'm probably, you know, let me put it this way: discernment is useful. Discernment is wise. I live on Maui, if there's a sign that says no swimming sharks, I'm not going to get in the water. I'm not frightened. I just don't want to get bitten or eaten, so that's a simple one. If I decide to never go in the water again because there might be a shark somewhere in the ocean, I'm probably acting in fear. And the action of fear, the guides say, is to claim more fear. And every choice we make in fear gets me more of the same. But, if there's a rattlesnake on the property, there's nothing wrong with a rattlesnake. We don't have them here, but if there was, I'm probably going to want to stay away. I don't need to get bitten. And then I might call somebody and say, hey, you know how to get a rattlesnake off my property? I don't want to get bitten. I don't want the dogs to get bitten. So, that's prudence, I think, and that's not necessarily fear. I have learned a little bit that sometimes when I have a response that feels like fear, but is really just anticipation or anxiety about a possible outcome, that's usually something that I need to do, So if the energy goes up, it's positive. If somebody asks me to do something and the energy just goes down, probably I don't need to. That's how I look at it. So I just try to assess. But I think if I'm overthinking it, probably I'm not in my knowing. When you think, you don't have to, there's really, as I said, there's not really a question. It's funny, I've learned this. And I think the guides taught it in one way or another, but they said, like, in knowing, there is no fear. And it's even if you were to get a rough piece of news, like a rough medical diagnosis, or hear news that is hard, the knowing of that isn't what's frightening. It's what's going to happen next that normally is. Oh my God, what am I going to do? The marriage is over. Oh my God, what do I do now? What am I going to be alone? Am I going to have enough money? Blah, blah, or losing the job or whatever. But the knowing itself is just simple. At least that's how I work with it now.
Yeah. So everything right now in the world seems like it's getting pretty chaotic and crazy, but at the same time, I see like more people that seem to be kind of, I guess you could say, awakening. What's your take on this?
My hope and my sense is that people are waking up to the futility of war and waking up to how poorly we treat one another. And, the last book that the guides dictated, which I actually don't even really remember, it's not out yet, it comes out in the fall, but the woman who was proofing the manuscript against the recording said it's really amazing how much focus there is in this book about war. And at the time that the book was dictated, we weren't in the position that we are right now. There were things happening, of course, but much more in the collective awareness now. So I hope that we are at a moment of reckoning where we get to make better choices than we've been known to make collectively in the past. I hope that's true. I actually feel it is. Do I think this is necessarily going to be an easy ride? No, I don't, but I've never gotten that. The guide said towards the very beginning of the very first book, which is now 12 books ago, they said humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. And they said that everything that was created in fear is going to need to be reseen or reknown in a new way, in a higher way. And that may involve, and they explained it, in some ways, a collapse of some of the structures that have become very invested in fear. If the mortar in a building is held together through fear, that building may not stand. The foundation may be fine. There's nothing wrong with commerce. There's nothing wrong with religion. There's nothing wrong with medicine or education in and of themselves. It might be how we manage them and where greed becomes implicit in the structures of them, and when the need to control others or, tremendous economic disparity exists, that, these things may need to be addressed. And I don't know that we get to address them by not seeing them. Things do have to be seen in order to be re-seen. You can't bypass it. It doesn't work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The most recent set of books was the Manifestation trilogy. And so the first one is Resurrection. And I know we normally, it's a word that we associate with Jesus. Most people would say that was their association, but the guides talk about it more in a personal way. And so I wonder how you feel like resurrection fits into your life, especially because you've had that story where you were down and you came up.
Well, it's still, it's not ended. I'm not arrived. I understand, if I understand how they're teaching it, they say that there is an aspect within all of us, which they call the divine self or the true self or the indwelling Christ. There's lots of different names for it in all different kinds of teachings. This part of us is seeking to be awakened and reclaim the aspects of us that have been in denial of it, which is a process it's a process of really reconciliation with our inherent divinity. And we don't necessarily do this for personal achievement. We do this so that we can be participatory at this level in this awareness, which is, you can call it Christ consciousness, I guess, if you want to, that is in support of everything and everyone that we see. It's about becoming a light that shines on other things. It's not about getting your way, and it's not about getting a bigger condominium or, a raise. There are, I think, things that come to us when we become aware of source as supply, which is a teaching. If I think my job is the source of my abundance, I'm screwed if the company closes. If I think that my spouse is the source of my security and my love, what happens if something happens to the relationship or to the spouse? So the idea of moving to a higher awareness of source and supply can change physical reality. It has for me in decided ways. I was, nearly homeless when I was in my late 20s. So I understand that this works. But it's not a teaching about getting something. It's more of a teaching of trusting in something or faith in something. So the resurrection stuff is about the divine self or the true self reclaiming the aspects of us that were held in shadow or darkness or operate in fear, or what they call the denial of the divine, which they say is the only real problem that we have, and our allowance of that, which is a process which, at least in my case, was horribly uncomfortable. And who wants it? But this is what they teach. And I'm not the teacher, I'm not. I'm really the radio that plays the teaching, that the teachings come through. And I know that they've supported my awareness, but am I going to announce that I have ascended? No. And when people do announce that, I get a little concerned, because I think if somebody's actually ascended, they're probably not announcing it. They don't need to. They're busy doing the work that comes, which is probably being in support of everyone in some way or another, in whatever way one serves. People think that how we serve is what we do for a living. And the guides say how one serves is how one is most fully expressed as the divine self or the true self. And that's the aspect of us that knows. And that is also the aspect of us that will call the opportunities to us for that service to occur.
That's great. So you're talking about, going back to what the guide was saying about the reckoning that's happening and the war. So it seems like basically, like, if you're not in alignment with source, you're going to be like forced to be, or it's going to be like ripped from you, or.
I don't get that necessarily. But they have said, and other people say things that are comparable to this. The sleeper can awaken, with a kiss on the forehead, or, by getting knocked out of the bed. And if we want to stay asleep, we might get knocked out of the bed. I've been knocked out of the bed a few times in my life, really, and hard on my ass too, and then I got to stand up and limp away and learn, I hope, from some of that stuff. And I don't think that that's over. I think that's part of being alive. And we come and we have things that we learn. And I don't think we show up for everything to be glorious just as we want it. Because my idea of as we want it, my idea of my life as I want to be, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I had a whole other list of things to do and be. And this other thing happened and it worked out even better. I'm not discounting the other stuff, but I didn't know enough to choose what was best for me at a period of time in my life. And I fortunately had some support, I guess, in moving forward anyway. So we have to, I think, be careful of imposing ideas of punishment on this that I don't think are necessary, which is if you don't get your act together, you're all gonna, the truth of the matter is if we don't get our act together, the guides have said you can learn the futility of war if you want to by having no one left to fight. You can do it that way if you want to, but you don't have to. And I think that that's true. I do think that we have free will and we have options. And I have great hopes, I have to say, for the younger people coming in. I really do. I've told this story before, but, I taught college for 25 years. And I often taught freshmen. They were like 17, 18, 19 years old, freshmen, sophomores at NYU. And I started teaching in the yuppie age, when everybody wanted to, it was all about getting. And, the kids would show up and say, how do I get a contract? How do I get a deal? How do I do this? That's what the talk was about. And I remember the last year that I was teaching, and I was teaching a little theater and there was a stage, and some kid got up on the stage with his folio of papers that he was going to present from. And he dropped the folder and 100 pages scattered all over the stage. And the kid just stood there. And every kid in the first row of that theater got to their feet and helped him gather the pages and gave it back to him. And then they sat back down and we went on. And I was blown away because when I was a kid, people would have laughed. Would have been a good snicker. And I don't know, maybe his best friend would have gotten up and helped. A whole row got up and just did the right thing. And I thought, boy, this is really lovely. I have great hope. And I think some of that hope is coming from the fact that people have become somewhat disenfranchised with the systems that they thought would bring them success. It took me till I was 50 years old to pay off my student loans. And I did finally. It took a long time. So I get it. We start looking for something with a bit more meaning when what you thought you were supposed to give all your power to doesn't seem to be there. And granted, everybody's different and I may be just being overly hopeful. But the guys that I work with have said that, it's going to take about 4 generations for people to really shift how we create a world. And we do create a world collectively. I don't like that teaching, but they say it. The guides said, you are in vibrational accord with everything you see or can even imagine, which means co-resonance, which is your law of attraction stuff again. And I said to them, well, if there's a book on a table in Paris, does that mean I'm in accord with the book on the table in Paris? And their answer was, the moment you know about the book on the table in Paris, yes, because you're holding it in consciousness. And there are simple teachings. What you damn and who you damn damns you back. And all damnation is putting somebody outside the light. That's it. Who you put in darkness calls you beside them to the darkness. That's not because they're doing anything to you. You're doing it, which is why there's all these spiritual teachings around forgiveness. It's about releasing the bindings. It doesn't mean that I have to have dinner with the person who tried to shoot me. It doesn't mean that. But it does mean, I can let go of what they did and allow them to be in the world and, have their own experience of whatever that is. So it's hard because, we all want to be right. And the guides say, self-righteousness is always the personality self, always, always, always. And that's an easy one to work with when I find myself wanting to make other people wrong or sitting on a high horse. I remember that, and it helps me.
I wonder, just to talk more about, the concept of putting people in darkness. Sometimes it can seem, to translate an idea to something that you practically, I think, is obviously more complicated. So how do you do that? Or how do the guides maybe point to how that can be actually accomplished?
I probably have to go to them to get a good answer. I don't know that it's early for me here where I am. They're saying we'll answer the question, the idea of who you are. The idea of who you are, sovereign must be understood. If your idea of sovereignty, if your idea of sovereignty is being right, at the cost of another being wrong, you always have an enemy. You will always have an enemy. To allow another to be who they are, to allow another to be who they are, regardless of what they think, how they vote, or who they love, or who they love, would be in great support of a higher awareness, When you desire to punish someone, you're putting yourself in shadow. You are putting yourself in shadow. They should pay for what they did. They should pay for what they did. Puts you in the prison beside them. When you understand that how you hold another is an act of love, or in the denial of love, you can have an easier time. We don't expect you to love. We don't expect you to love in an emotional sense, but in an awareness of their right to be, whoever they are, whatever they have done, whatever they have chosen to learn through is under their soul's dictate. People are held accountable. For their actions, and that is fine. You are always accountable to what you do, and also how you think, When you realize the divine, which means know the divine in someone else, they are actually redeemed by that act. When you deny the divine in them, like it or not, you've denied yourself. You have denied it in yourself, period. And they're saying period.
Thank you. I'm curious in regards to trauma, because one thing that I've experienced is I went through the 12 steps and I got to this point where I did the turnarounds, was able to forgive everyone in my life. But then some of those things came back, and I feel like I still then have reoccurring resentment. So is there a way to forgive somebody just once and have it be permanent? Or is it kind of like this constant game you have to work at?
If you think about it as a game, I think you're going to tangle yourself in it. If you understand it, I suspect, as a process, and peeling back layers, it's helpful. Like I said, I'm writing this book about my life. My childhood was not great, and people did some really stupid things and harmful things, and I'm feeling them as I write about them. What I don't want are these things sort of carried with me like fingerprint smudges, on me, and I think that's how those things operate. And the guides talk about how to clear those things, or how to release what they do, which is attract more of the same. So my trauma calls back trauma, and I understand this. But I don't know that any of this stuff is a magic wand. I really don't. And I think that gets a little dangerous. And then you get into magical thinking, or it should work, or God should do what I say. There are things that I probably still need to learn. And I know that's for sure, but possibly some of the stuff that feels unresolved to me is going to be the opportunity for me to learn it. I could say that, had I never had a drink, I might have had a very different life. But I did. And had I not gone through what I went through, I know for a fact that we wouldn't be having this conversation now. And maybe I needed to go through some of that stuff, and hopefully I'm done with it, but hopefully, I don't know. I don't know the future. I really don't. So let me ask about that question from them. The residual affective pain will linger in the energetic field, will linger in the energetic field in the body and in the body until it is released, The process of releasing can be instantaneous, At times it is, or can be a process of relinquishing the need to maintain the trauma, for a need of protection. In some ways you utilize these things. In some ways you utilize these things to your benefit, The one who is very sensitive, the one who is very sensitive may create a buffer, may drink, may do something to keep others away, Perhaps she needs that for a period of time. Until she understands that who and what she is, at an intrinsic level, is truly safe, is truly self, that the God within her is unafraid, and cannot be harmed, Much of what you're doing, all of you doing is try to protect yourself, what you think could happen, from what you think could happen, and create shields. Much of the reason you do this, and much of the reason you do this is because of your experience, is because of what you experienced when you were young, in a prior lifetime, if you prefer, but something feels, something that feels out of control. Until you see these things, as opportunities to develop or grow, you will be challenged by them. Unless they become your ally. You will perceive them as enemy. You will perceive them as an enemy, and they do not need to be.
How do personal and collective resurrection correlate? And how do we care about and plug into that collective without getting bogged down by the darkness and the pain?
Well, let me see. I'll try with this one. The guides talk about, they call it the upper room, and they say it's the octave of vibration above the common field. The common field are the reality that we share, that we know. And they say that we are all in tone and vibration, and we are entrained in this low octave, which has been very invested in the energy of fear. It's like the guides have said, you're born into a swimming pool that somebody already peed in. It's like the water's already dirty, but you don't know it. It's what you're used to, and you expect it to be there. So we continue to perpetuate and recreate what we have known, because it's what we've known. And they said that the personality self knows itself entirely through history. It doesn't really have a new thought. It knows itself through the teachings. This is what a man is. This is what a teaching is. This is what a building looks like. All of these properties that things have claimed and we give meaning to. The divine self, or the monad, they say operates in what they call a higher field, or they call it the upper room. And they say because we're in tone or music, they say any song can be played in a higher octave. It needs to be transposed to be played. So you can sing Happy Birthday in one key, you can lift in an octave up into infinity, beyond what the ears can even hear. And they say that the upper room is what we can hold while we still maintain a body. It's the highest level of awareness we can hold. And the upper room is also an octave with its low notes and its high notes. It's just expansive. So the idea of moving beyond the singular to the collective, I suspect, first involves an awareness that while we do hold a level of separation, I have my own body, you have yours, I know whose shoes to put on in the morning, things like that, and that's necessary and useful. Where we are comparable and alike is actually greater than where we are separate. And that's the beginning of a change, I think. But we like to parse everything out in this kind of ridiculous tribalism. which is all about separation, and we foster it. We have our I don't know. I was reading something today online about Soho House, which is, the members only club getting too popular, and now nobody wants to, now it's too popular. It's not special. We're not exclusive. And I don't know if it's true. I'm not a member, but I thought, well, that's funny, So let me go to the guides. How do we move from the singular to the awareness of the collective, the divine self? The divine self is already in you, the one beside you, with the one beside you, and those over there, and those over there. The God within you, is not operating in separation. We acknowledge this. When you acknowledge this and give it free rein, to reclaim a life, and a world, the world is made new. The world is made new by the action of the divine, not the personality self trying to fix things as he or she thinks she should, but by the aspect of you that already knows true, that already knows that this is true. The transcendence of the physical form, is simply a metaphor, for an awakening, You think you have to die. You think you have to die to know God in fullness. In fact, God is present now. By whatever name you wish to call it, by whatever name you wish to call it. With you, when you acknowledge the divine within you that is already in union, with the source of all things, and in fact, an aspect of it, the world changes rapidly. Through your presence in it. You are reclaiming the world. You are reclaiming the world in the higher octave, that he was describing, through your participation in it, period. And they're saying period.
So you were talking about how the guides they mentioned a lot about war. Have they talked at all about what's beyond that time frame at all?
Not so much, but I haven't asked. And if it comes up in their lectures, I suspect that they will address it, as they have always done, in a kind of strange sequence. When I look at the books that have been dictated now, the first book was delivered through me in 2009 and published in 2010. So we're looking at 15 years now, almost, of their teachings. I suspect if you were to go through the books and when they were channeled, you'd see how relevant they were to the time in which they were published, or how they were addressing things that we were starting to contend with. They usually foretell what's about to come in the books, actually. But the books actually aren't dated. They're really a process of comprehension, I think, of who we are and what everything is. So they haven't talked a lot about it, but I suspect that they are. Well, the book that's coming out next, maybe this will answer your question, is called A World Made New. And they're talking about how the awareness of the source of all things through us reclaims the physical reality that we know. That's the teaching. It's always really been the teaching. It's not just about us feeling better. It's about all of us, I suspect, in an awareness of what is already true that we've been choosing or deciding to ignore.
Beautiful. My turn. My question is about your community. So I have heard so many good things. Like we interview a lot of different healers, spiritual leaders, all these different people, but your community is obsessed with you. Out of everyone we watch, they love you the most. So what goes on in your workshops and just in your community?
I live alone in the rainforest with two little dogs. I see friends for kirtan once a week, and that's what I think of as my community, the people that I see personally. The people that come to my workshops, they're students of the guides. They're not Paul's community, and there's a real difference here. I'm not the teacher. I do the psychic work I do, and I'm a channel for the guides. What happens in the workshops, and I do a lot of them, and I'm really happy to be doing them live again, because the guides come through and they channel, but they also attune everybody to the energies that they work with. And it's very palpable. So people who've never felt energy before are often having these very large experiences. I have a lot of people. It's funny to me because plant medicine's not been part of my journey, but people who come in and say, "Oh my God, this is like being at a ceremony. I'm having similar experiences here with the energy." So it's potent and it's exciting, but what it does is it validates, for me at least, the information that accompanies the energy, because the guides are showing you how to work with it yourself and take it home and be it in your world. The books do this too. But there's a difference between standing with a partner, somebody you've never met before, and staring at them and watching, them disappear or turn into light, or, all the things that have been known to happen when people do this work. So they lecture, they work with the attunements, and they get everybody working. And usually in a weekend and an evening, they'll attune everybody, bang. They just go bang. It's amazing to me that what they will now do in an evening. But when they do a weekend or a 5-day thing or a week-long thing, they really do an immersion with the teaching or an aspect of the teaching. Most of the books were channeled in front of audiences now, live. I mean, we record them, we send the tapes right to the transcriptionist right after the lectures are delivered, and then these become the books. They're not doing a book right now. They're getting ready once I finish my product to do some more. And we'll see what that's about. But every workshop is different because they're always teaching forward. And they say that they teach in a one-room schoolhouse. So everybody who comes is going to be met at the level that they can be met by the teachings and by the energy. And that's it. I'm sure there are people that come and don't feel a thing, and, the faces don't change and things like that. Most people have an experience for them that is useful, I hope. But they're the teachers, and they attune everybody. And sometimes if the group isn't too big, they'll actually work directly energetically with each person there so that they can, have an experience of that too, and what comes with the attunements that they bring.
Beautiful. Anybody interested in any of those workshops, we'll put a link in the description on how they can find those.
Yeah. Just my last question is, I started reading the books, but then I read, or I listened to an Audible and discovered that I really loved that so much better. And so I've always consumed it in that form, which I know plenty of people will probably feel like that. And the attunements were so powerful for me. And I wondered if you could leave us with an attunement, or even just to say what have been some of the more recent ones from more recent books to leave our group with as we are going into our heart.
Oh, the attunements work in sequence, and sometimes what I call the attunements are the set ones that they build one on top of the next, and there's all these other things that they do to work with different areas of our lives or our awareness. I'll let them see what they want to do with this. We'd like to do things. We would like to do 2 things. First, acknowledge them for their willingness to grow, for their willingness to grow. And if you acknowledge the aspect of yourself that is indeed willing to grow, that is indeed willing to grow, you will enhance your ability to do it. You will enhance your availability to it and enjoy the ride a bit more, As for what we call attunements, they are intoning, speaking words of vibration, of vibrational clarity. Now, this is a funny sentence. He doesn't like saying it. He doesn't like saying it, but each word is invested. But each word is invested with a vibrational meaning. With a vibrational meaning, it will support the student. It will support the student in aligning to it, through the invocation of sound, and the intent that accompanies it, and the intent that accompanies it. The most simple one, which we would begin with, is as follows. You may say this after we say it. You may say this after we say it. I know who I am in truth.
Who I am in truth.
I know what I am in truth.
I know what I am in truth.
I know how I serve in truth.
I know how I serve in truth.
I am free. I am free. I am free.
I am free. I am free. I am free.
I am in the upper room.
I am in the upper room.
I have come. I have come. I have come.
I have come, I have come, I have come.
Behold, I make all things new.
Behold, I make all things new.
It will be so.
It will be so.
God is, God is, God is.
God is, God is, God is.
Let yourself be known. And say this if you wish. I am known, I am known, I am known.
I am known, I am known, I am known.
And I sing blessings to each of you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so this interview is a part of a 30-day challenge where it's not really a challenge, but it's basically all our group is really just coming together to take this journey into the heart where they're going to try to discover who they are on a deeper level. So I was just wondering if you or the guides had any closing message for them as we set sail on this journey.
Don't make it harder than it needs to be.
Boom.
And don't invest in fear and don't glamorize it. Enjoy the journey. Enjoy the journey. The road is before you. The road is before you when it doesn't seem to be there, even when it doesn't seem to be there, period. And they're saying period.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
So lastly, we just know any other ways we can support you. We're really excited about the memoir coming out, the new book, all these courses you're doing. So what else?
No, that's it. I mean, I'm online almost every Wednesday. The guides are teaching. And once a month, there is an intensive online, and those are good. The guides really bring through a teaching. They're 2 hours each, and they're live, but you can watch them from anywhere in the world. We send people transcripts and recordings. And, and if you haven't checked it out, you might want to. And if it's for you, great. And if it's not, that's fine too.
Thank you so much, Paul, for coming back on with us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Hi, I'm Jack Canfield. You probably know me as a co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series and a featured teacher in the book of the movie, The Secret. And I want to invite you to a very special and important event called Love Unleashed, which is being produced by the Heart Math Institute on May 16th and 19th, where I'll be presenting along with Deborah Rosman, Howard Martin, Gregg Braden, and Lynn McTaggart, and a whole host of other people. And I'll be doing a presentation called Love is the Answer, where I'll be guiding you on how to overcome some of the obstacles to the full expression of love, such as fear and the unconscious limiting beliefs that we have, and how to reconnect with the essence of your soul, which is love. I look forward to seeing you there.